Hello, Jean-Luc from Fins and Flora again. It is still Tuesday, March 19th. Just to follow up on my earlier video, my superworms, which I use to feed, I'm hiding in my bathroom. All my animals, I've got geckos and lizards, and I chop them up and feed them to the fish, have become infested with grain mites. So I was hoping to do a video on how I culture things, and admittedly I've been knowing that the substrate need to be cleaned in a while. You're gonna see me scratch a lot because I have a weird thing about mites, and I'm gonna have to touch it and you feel them crawling over your hands, and then you feel like they're all over your skin, and it's just, they're really gross. I really hate mites. Not all mites. Often people, when they hear about mites, they think, oh, well, mites are parasitic. And some are, and some aren't. So grain mites, let's see if I can, be careful not to drop my phone. So what I've done is I've pulled out my culture. I have a stack of drawers, and each drawer was going to have a culture in it, and I was just getting ready to split them. But I've got that drawer sitting in water so that if the mites, because they're kind of in critical mass in the bin here, and if they decide to roam, they'll hit the water and not do a very good job swimming. Now the light's not super great in here. Let's see if I can do something about that. Alright, so this is my bin, and a lot of my adults are still in here. So for substrate, I'll show you what I'm going to move them into. So this is coconut coir and sphagnum moss. Now this stuff holds moisture very well, which is part of the problem. So the superworms, here's a conundrum. I think, all right, so here's a pupa. Let's see if we can line these guys up a little bit. And so the pupa are stimulated by, looks like a Kakuna from Pokemon, by the larvae getting stressed out. So there's that, and then in here somewhere there was a beetle. And then there's little styrofoam blocks. This is leftover. I didn't have a whole bunch of coconut coir because I really wasn't ready for this today. And this is stuff I was using to make a artificial back. So this is expanding foam. I'm gonna, as I come across that, I'm gonna toss that in the garbage there. Oh, so there's the larva. And see what, he's a defense mechanism. His head kind of looks like his butt, so he's backing up, going, here, you bite this, bite this. And they're pretty good feeders. I'm having really good success conditioning fish and getting lots of eggs with these guys. They're pretty high in fat, and compared to mealworms, which are their smaller relatives, I'm gonna have to deal with them. I think I'm just gonna toss my mealworm culture because I was gonna get rid of them anyways. These guys, because they're bigger, there's more exoskeleton to meat on the inside, so nutritionally speaking, they're a little bit better. And people will often feed them cereal grains. So I had actually added some muffin mix into my old bin, but as you can see here, my substrate layer, there's another pupa, is not very big. Now those ones I've pulled out, and the critters, the mites, oh, there's somewhere in here, there's a beetle. The mites, he's hiding, oh there he is, he's hiding. There, now, nice thing, or the annoying thing about parasites is, well, it's good and bad. A lot of parasites are host specific, and so there are mites that parasitize a lot of insects. So I'm going to try to see if I can get that to focus. So this is the adult beetle, and I don't see on him any mites. That thing sticking out of his butt is actually a defense mechanism, so when they're agitated, they stick that out and it releases a kind of foul smelling chemical. And I was dealing with some of the adults this morning, so trying to rinse mites off of them. And so my hands have stunk like it all day. Some people will say, oh, you got to be careful with these things, they bite. I'll grab fistfuls of them and wander around before I get to feeding with them, and they're just in my hand and I forget about them. And I have yet to be bitten. Sometimes, especially the larvae's legs, feel a little bit squiggly. Now, if you were to have one of these guys, and so the rumor is that sometimes they crawl out of critters if you don't kill them properly. I have never encountered that as an issue. If you're really worried, so you could just, and you're not super squeamish, I wouldn't feed the adults to bugs. Their exoskeleton is pretty hard and they taste really bad, so a lot of things won't eat them. If you keep mealworms, their adults are much smaller than this, and I've had some success. My geckos will eat the adult mealworms, but they're a different family of darkling beetles, and they're really cool, just kind of in their own right. I can't find them, but you could just cut off the front end of them, and then when I'm mincing them up, they usually go that way. So this, so I feed my guys, or I got ahead of myself. So mites like warmth and like moisture. These guys also like warmer conditions. Where's he hiding? Second point. These guys also like warmer conditions, and they need moisture to drink and survive, but their bedding doesn't have to be moist. So I've used carrots, or when I'm cutting up apples for my kids' lunch, just the little bit in the middle, I throw that in there, apple cores, and that seems to be all right. I've was feeding them coffee grinds, and I think that's where my downfall was, because in this bin, I haven't cleaned out the substrate a whole bunch, and you can see the bin has gotten quite full. Whereas this bin, this is about the amount of substrate that I would want. And so I've been putting it off, dealing with it, and that's what's caused this problem. And it, essentially the mites run out of food and they go, where else can I find food? And this is where I'm gonna get the heebie-jeebies, because stirring it around, everything just starts moving because it's just a cloud of little mites. And you can identify grain mites versus other mites is that when they get agitated, they release a kind of almost minty smell. And I only learned this upon doing some reading today on this discovery, which has convinced me that these are in fact grain mites and not parasitic mites eating these guys, which is good, because removing the substrate should solve my problems. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort through here. I'm going to grab all my adults. I'm going to give them a rinse just to get any loose mites. And I found that this morning that I can rinse off those mites really easily. I'm going to pick through and grab any larger larvae. Any smaller ones that are too tiny to get, I'm going to leave, and that's just a loss. And hopefully with adults and I'll get enough large larvae that I'll get by. So I go through probably 6 or so larvae a day. On the days where I feed my fish, and then when I'm feeding frogs and beetles, I go through a lot more, because each frog, or not beetles, frogs and geckos, each frog needs about 1. Each gecko eats about 1, and they eat about 3 times a week. Although that will vary, because these guys are a lot higher in fat. I was feeding pretty readily, almost daily with these guys to my leopard geckos, and they got so fat that they had rolls under their chins, so I cut back on their feeding. And I don't know if you can see on my hands all that little bits of dust and stuff. Some of it is the frass, the chewed up bits from these guys, but some of it is leftover bits from the mites. And I don't know if you can see if any of these will start moving, but they're mites. So that's going to be my next 40 minutes or so, is sorting through this, rinsing guys off, and hoping to salvage my colony. I was hoping to do a better video on my whole feeding update, so you could see my system. It was working really well, and now it's gone sideways, but it's salvageable, I think. All right, Bye.